Alright guys, everyone thought Swapsaken was just a joke for April Fools, but there's actually a much darker reason behind why these characters were swapped. Let's get into it! With the April Fools update coming out, Swapsaken has actually turned into one of the most successful releases we've seen in a while. A lot of players have been actively playing the mode, and instead of treating it like a one-time joke, many people now want it to stay in the game permanently rather than being removed after the event ends. The reason for this is simple. Swapsaken didn't just add random changes, it completely flipped the game in a way we haven't really seen before. Survivors became killers became survivors, and entire characters were reimagined with new designs, abilities, and meanings. But as more information came out, it became clear that there is actually a deeper meaning behind all of this. A lot of this was planned out by Vess, who focused heavily on the movesets and the designs of these swapped characters. Instead of just switching roles, these characters represent different outcomes and alternate paths for each of them. Starting off, the first survivor we saw with a completely different design was 1X. In Swapsaken, 1X became the Poisoned. While this version still has similar abilities to 1X, the design is completely different and is actually based on the old Telemon account. This account was one of Shedletsky's abandoned accounts that was used between June 2006 and March 2012. The avatar itself still holds that classic Telemon design from 2012, which directly inspired the Poisoned. From this, we can see that the Poisoned represents what's left of 1X, the god of chaos after losing power. It seems like 1X's power was either stolen or absorbed by 2x2, which then led to the creation of Telemon, the god of balance. This is where things get really interesting, because Shedletsky didn't just swap places with 1X. Instead, he created an entirely new version of the character. This version, 2x2, becomes the Swordmaster, Telemon, the god of balance. In a way, 1X has now been pushed beneath the Swordmaster, becoming something similar to what Telemon is, just an abandoned figure that no one really remembers anymore, since his account has been inactive. The Telemon account itself has gone through multiple avatars over time, including the Swordmaster design, which has now fully evolved into what we see in Swapsaken. Moving on from that, we also have the Kid, who has been transformed into a version of 007 and 7. What makes this interesting is that this is technically the real version of Cool Kid, but in Forsaken, they've always been separated into two different characters. Seeing this version of 007 gives us something we don't usually get to see, which adds even more depth to the character. When it comes to the lore behind this, it actually gets quite detailed. From what we know, Cool Kid originally lived a normal life, and Vess wasn't entirely sure where to take the character at first. However, the idea evolved into something much deeper. 007 and 7 prevented Cool Kid from using the GUI at first, acting as a form of restriction or control. Then, one day, his father went missing. When Cool Kid tried to find him, he ended up getting lost in the same realm and was forced into a situation where he had to use the GUI he once feared. This explains how the GUI eventually turned him into 007 and 7. He didn't choose to become this hacker, he was forced into it just to survive. What makes this even more interesting is that it essentially turned him into his father. You can clearly see the resemblance, not just in the design, but in the clothing and even the added hat, making it obvious that he has become a reflection of what he was trying to find. The Kogui itself can be compared to something like SCP-035, which is a mask that takes over its host and corrupts them. In a similar way, the Kogui completely took over Cool Kid and transformed him into something he never wanted to become. He was forced into using it, and once he did, there was no going back. Next, we have the Corrupt, which shows John Doe transformed into something very similar to Jane Doe. This version is especially interesting because it ties directly into their relationship. Jane Doe has been trying to figure out why John Doe became corrupted this entire time, and this version shows a possible outcome where he overcomes that corruption. This skin is similar to the Milestone 1 version, but without the heavy corruption surrounding him. Vess confirmed that this is essentially a swap with Jane Doe, but the deeper meaning is that John Doe is overcoming his own self-doubt and fear in order to chase after the person he cares about. This is where things get deeper. John Doe finally manages to overcome the corruption, but we can still see that it hasn't fully disappeared. His body is still damaged, with duct tape wrapped around him and his arm still in bad condition. It even looks like he had to reattach his arm after losing it when the corruption first took over. Jane Doe is still trying to figure out what caused all of this in the first place. The corruption itself is fueled by self-doubt and fear, which is what took control of him. There's also the idea that figures like Bilderman, Dussaker, and Shedletsky didn't help him when he needed it, with Bilderman possibly carrying the most blame. All John Doe needed to do was overcome those feelings, but even after doing so, he's still stuck in Forsaken. Finally, we have the Swordmaster, who is the only killer introduced in this version of the game. As mentioned earlier, this is Shedletsky's transformation into Telamon, the god of balance. The design directly reflects the old Telamon avatar, bringing everything full circle. The lore behind this character is also very important. Shedletsky stole 1 by 1 feet second powers in order to bring balance and order. However, instead of just taking the power, he also absorbed all of the hatred that came with it. This caused Telamon to become consumed by that power, ultimately turning him into something far worse. Instead of fixing things, he became overwhelmed by what he absorbed. This turned him into a killer, completely opposite of what he originally intended to be. He now thrives off that power and the chaos it brings, making it unclear whether he will ever return to what he once was. What makes all of this even more interesting is how the survivors seem to represent recovery. Many of them have overcome the problems that originally led them into Forsaken. 1X has lost her hatred and become more stable. John Doe has overcome his corruption. Cool Kid has learned to control the GUI instead of being consumed by it. Meanwhile, the Swordmaster represents the opposite. Instead of recovering, he has fully fallen into the power and hatred he absorbed, making him the only one who hasn't been able to escape that cycle. Looking forward, it's likely that next year's Swapsaken could expand on this even further. Players already have ideas for new swaps, such as Slasher and Guest 1337, where we might finally see Slasher without his mask. There's also the possibility of Noob and Sixer swapping roles, or even new abilities being added for some of the killers turned into survivors. A lot of players also want these Swapsaken characters to become actual skins in the main game because of how unique the designs are. While this could work, it would need to be done carefully so that each version still fits the character they are based on. At the end of the day, even though this was just an April Fool's event, it added a surprising amount of depth to the game. Instead of being a joke, it actually gave us a look into alternate outcomes for these characters. What would happen if they either overcame their struggles or completely fell into them? If this gets expanded on in the future, Swapsaken could become one of the most important parts of Forsaken's overall story. What do you think could happen next year with Swapsaken? Subscribe and hit the bell for more Forsakening it.